The entire backyard went silent when my 4-year-old son looked up at my mother and asked for some fries. He was smiling, holding his tiny plate, completely unaware that the person he trusted most was about to break his heart. My mother looked at him, pulled the plate away, and said something I never thought I would hear from my own family. Everyone laughed. Everyone except my son. He lowered his eyes and whispered, "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" That was the moment I stopped protecting my mother's biggest secret and decided my son deserved the truth. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I believed family was something you protected no matter what. I grew up thinking that mothers were supposed to be the people who made you feel safe, the people who stood beside you when the world turned against you. And for a long time, I believed my mother was that person. When I became a mother myself, I understood love in a completely different way. My son, Noah, was 4 years old, and he was the kind of child who made strangers smile. He asked 100 questions every day, carried his favorite toy everywhere, and trusted people with a heart that was still untouched by disappointment. To him, everyone deserved kindness because that was the world I had tried to create for him. My mother, Linda, loved telling people how proud she was to be a grandmother. Whenever relatives were around, she would show pictures of Noah and talk about how lucky she was. From the outside, she looked like the perfect grandmother. She baked cookies, bought gifts, and smiled for every family photo. But behind those smiles, there were moments that always left me uncomfortable. She had a habit of making small comments that I tried to ignore. Sometimes she would compare Noah to other children in the family. Sometimes she would make jokes that seemed harmless to everyone else but made me feel like something was wrong. I always found a reason to excuse it. I told myself she was just old-fashioned. I told myself she did not mean anything by it. I told myself keeping peace was more important than starting another family argument. That is what I had always done. I protected my mother's feelings. I protected her image. I protected the idea that our family was closer than it really was. So when she invited us to the family barbecue that summer, I honestly thought it might be a chance to fix things. I had no idea that by the end of that day, I would finally stop protecting her and start protecting my son. The day of the barbecue started like any other family gathering. The sun was shining, music was playing in the backyard, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. My mother's house was packed with relatives, cousins, and family friends. Everyone was laughing, telling stories, and acting like we were the kind of family people admired. Noah was excited from the moment we arrived. He wore his favorite blue shirt and carried a small toy car in his hand. He kept running around the yard, showing everyone his little car tricks and asking questions about everything he saw. Watching him smile made me forget about all the uncomfortable moments I had experienced with my mother before. For a while, I thought maybe things were finally different. Then lunch was served. Everyone gathered around the table, filling their plates with burgers, salads, and fries. Noah sat beside me, swinging his little legs under the chair. After a few minutes, he looked toward my mother, who was standing near the food table. "Grandma, can I have some fries?" he asked with the biggest smile. It was such a simple question. A 4-year-old child was not asking for anything special. He just wanted to share a normal moment with his grandmother. But my mother looked down at him, picked up the plate of fries, and pulled it away. At first, I thought I misunderstood what I was seeing. Then she said, "Those are only for my real grandchild." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a second, nobody moved. Then a few people laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. Enough for Noah to notice. His smile disappeared. He looked around at the adults who were laughing, then looked back at me with confused eyes. "Mommy," he whispered. "Did I do something wrong?" That question broke something inside me. Because Noah was only 4 years old. He did not understand family drama, old arguments, or adult problems. He only understood that someone he loved had just made him feel like he did not belong. And standing there, watching my son lower his head, I finally realized something. This was not just about a plate of fries. This was about every time I stayed silent, every time I made excuses, and every time I allowed my mother to hurt him because I was afraid of hurting her. For years, I had convinced myself that my mother's behavior was just the result of stress, personality differences, or old disagreements that would eventually disappear. I kept finding explanations because admitting the truth was painful. But standing there at that barbecue, watching my son's face change, I could no longer pretend. The reason my mother treated Noah differently was connected to a secret she had spent years trying to hide. Before Noah was born, my relationship with my mother had already started falling apart. She never accepted some of the choices I made as an adult. She believed I had disappointed her, and instead of saying it directly, she carried that anger quietly. When I became pregnant, I thought becoming a grandmother would change her. I thought holding her grandson would soften her heart. For a while, it seemed like it did. But slowly, I started noticing things. She would celebrate other grandchildren but forget Noah's important moments. She would buy expensive gifts for others but tell me she was trying to teach him not to expect things. She would make comments about him being different, and whenever I confronted her, she would laugh and say I was being too sensitive. I always stayed quiet. I told myself Noah was too young to notice. I told myself children were resilient. I told myself avoiding conflict was better for everyone. But I was wrong. Children notice everything. They notice who hugs them. They notice who ignores them. They notice when someone makes them feel like they are less important. The truth was, I had spent years protecting my mother's reputation while slowly allowing my son to experience the same pain I had once felt. And that day at the barbecue, I finally understood. My silence was not keeping the family together. My silence was helping my mother continue hurting him. I did not yell at my mother that day. I did not create a scene in front of everyone. I did not give my family the dramatic argument they probably expected. I simply walked over to Noah, took his little hand, and said, "Come on, buddy. We're going home." He looked up at me with those confused little eyes, still trying to understand why everything had changed. He grabbed his toy car with his other hand and quietly followed me toward the front door. Behind us, I could hear people whispering. Some told me I was overreacting. Some said my mother was only joking. A few even suggested that I should let it go because family makes mistakes. But none of them saw Noah's face. None of them heard the way his voice changed when he asked me if he had done something wrong. On the drive home, he sat quietly in the back seat. Usually, he would talk nonstop about everything he saw outside the window. But that day, he just stared down at his toy car. After several minutes, he softly asked, "Mommy, does Grandma not like me?" That question hurt more than anything my mother had said. I pulled the car over and turned around. I told him, "Noah, you did nothing wrong. Nothing about you needs to change. Sometimes adults make hurtful choices, but that is never because of the child." That night, my phone started ringing. My relatives said I embarrassed my mother. They told me I should apologize and bring Noah back to the family. Then my mother called. She did not ask if Noah was okay. She asked why I was making her look bad. And that was when I realized something. She was more worried about losing control of the story than losing the trust of her grandson. For the first time in my life, I stopped worrying about protecting my mother's feelings. I stopped wondering what the relatives would think. I stopped worrying about whether people would say I was disrespectful. Because the truth was, I had spent years staying silent, and my silence had only made my mother believe her actions had no consequences. A few days after the barbecue, my mother called a family meeting. She told everyone I had misunderstood what happened. She said she was only teasing Noah and that I had become too emotional as a mother. That was the moment I knew I had to speak. I sat across from my family and calmly explained everything they never saw. I told them about the missed birthdays, the forgotten gifts, the comments that made Noah feel different, the times I had gone home upset but stayed quiet because I did not want to create another family problem. At first, everyone was silent. Some people looked uncomfortable because they had only seen the version of my mother she wanted them to see. The loving grandmother, the generous mother, the person who always looked innocent in front of others. But slowly, people started remembering their own moments. Small things they had ignored. Comments they had laughed off. Situations they thought were harmless. My mother became defensive. She said I was trying to destroy the family. I looked at her and said, "No, Mom. I'm finally stopping the behavior that was hurting it." I was not trying to punish her. I was not trying to embarrass her. I was simply doing what I should have done years ago. I was protecting my child. And for the first time, I was no longer afraid of telling the truth. A few weeks passed after everything came out. For the first time in years, my mother was no longer able to control the story. She could not simply smile in front of relatives and pretend nothing had happened. People had started seeing the difference between the person she showed the world and the person I had known privately. Then one evening she called me. Her voice sounded different, softer than usual. She said she wanted to apologize. For a moment, I did not know how to respond. I had imagined this moment many times before. I thought hearing my mother admit she was wrong would make all the pain disappear. But it did not. She told me she regretted what she said to Noah. She said she never wanted him to feel unwanted and that she realized she had allowed her own anger to affect the way she treated him. I listened quietly. Then I told her, "Mom, I needed you to understand that before you hurt him, not after." She started crying and said she wished she could change the past. I told her I wished that too. But some moments cannot be erased. An apology can be the beginning of change, but it does not automatically rebuild trust. I explained that if she wanted a place in Noah's life, she had to prove through her actions that she could be someone safe for him. Because my son's heart was not something I was willing to risk again. For the first time, I chose boundaries over guilt. And that choice changed everything. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest decision I ever made was not walking away from my mother. It was accepting that I could not force someone to become the person I needed them to be. For years, I believed keeping the family together was my responsibility. I thought staying quiet was the same as being strong. But I learned that protecting my child sometimes means disappointing other people. Noah is older now, and he does not remember every detail of that barbecue. But he remembers feeling loved. He remembers that I held his hand and stood beside him. And that is what matters. Family is not just about sharing the same last name or the same bloodline. Family is about the people who make you feel safe, valued, and accepted. That day, I stopped protecting my mother's secret, and I started protecting my son's heart.